T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello everyone, I'm Ken Kara and welcome to our Laurel Mall studio located in Hazel Township on the planet Earth. A few years back I was asked to fill some time on SSP TV Community News, take up space if you will, and I started producing a segment where I talked with interesting people, usually from our area, who worked in the space industry whose stories could inspire us to take up space as a hobby or a job. I'm working really hard to explain the title of the show here. To start this show, let's go back to the 90s. I'm riding home with my family from a Penn State football game, looking out at the clear night sky from my car window while listening to some classic tracks on Saturday Night Live at the Oldies, hosted by Shadoe Steele on a local NEPA radio station. Shadoe Steele provided me with so much entertainment growing up, I just didn't realize how much until recently. It turns out the man behind the microphone on Saturday Night Live at the Oldies is also an aerospace engineer who operated some of the biggest entertainment and communication satellites that beamed down hit shows and exciting events to our living rooms. I should note that Shadoe Steele is also known as Rusty Fender, and here's my interview with him. Before the interview, you said you worked with Fox News, correct? Or Fox News?
That's correct. Fox News, Fox Business Channel, and the Fox Television Network New York operations.
And then you said aerospace division. Correct. I didn't know that existed. What does that mean? When you tell somebody that, what does that mean? You're working in their aerospace division?
All the news feeds and all the programming, of course, mainly is via satellite, and if not, it's done by what they call a backbone fiber optic backup link. So there's terrestrial and then there's satellite. So what my job basically was, actually for 28 years, 8 years at CBS, 8 years at NBC, 4 years at MSNBC in Secaucus, New Jersey, 4 years at CNBC in Inglewood Cliffs, 8 years at AT&T at the World Trade Center twice. So what I basically did in my team at the time was to figure out how long a 10-year satellite in ionospheric orbit, which is 22,297.5 lateral miles above the equator in geosynchronous orbit, will last. If there's fuels on board, of course, on a spacecraft. So if you use a lot of fuels, if the satellite is a very difficult and very unstable spacecraft, you have to use more fuel. It's just like your car. The only difficulty is you don't have a service station to pull over and get what they call liquefied 3-monomethyl-hydrazine component with a liquid oxygen catalyst. So when the satellite's fuel becomes depleted from using it to alternate and keep it in this 40 mile by 40 mile by 40 mile square linear orbital box, as it's called, you use a lot of the fuel, and the satellite, which is probably close to a 10-year life, will only have a 9-year life. If the spacecraft is very, very stable and requires very, very little movement to keep it in that orbital window, that orbital box, you may get 11 years out of it. So every time you fire, which is usually every 13 seconds, you get a feedback from the spacecraft to let you know where it is in that box. The problem is, another problem is, if that satellite should drift out of its 40-mile square window, not only could you use that satellite, because all your ground stations, all your dishes are looking up at that spacecraft from the ground, but all the little aperture, the small aperture 18-inch dishes on top of convenient marts, gas stations, on top of supermarkets, on top of stores, on top of everything, will actually lose their credit card information. So you'll not be able to do any credit card transactions if that spacecraft drifts out of that 40-mile window. It's very rare. It happened one time, and I was working for AT&T at the time. Luckily, I was not on duty that night. It was back in 1998, and it happened from the Hawley, Pennsylvania, near Lake Wallenpaupack Control Facility, which I also managed for 4 years out of that combined 8 years at AT&T. So 4 years in New York City, 4 years in Hawley. And the satellite drifted, and there are three very technical components of any spacecraft. They're tridundant. So everything is 3-to-1. It's backed up. There's a primary, a backup, and then there's a backup to the backup. It's almost impossible that all three fail. In 1998, all three failed. And it was a huge loss. In 1998, that was literally 2005. So we were 7 years away from the development of the first smartphone. So people, including myself, still had numeric and mnemonic pagers. Most of the paging for North America was on that spacecraft. So paging was down literally for about 10 days. There was no paging. At that time, the paging was lost until AT&T, until we could move another spacecraft into that position. You know, when I started in the business, I got out of college in 1979, and, you know, it was relatively new. There were only a handful of satellites there. And, you know, now we have hundreds, and they want to get the 2-degree spacing, and that's what it is. 2-degree spacing, when I said that before, let me tell you what that is. 2-degree spacing, if you did the math, at 22,297.5 miles. That never changes. That's ionospheric orbit, 22,297.5. So if you take that number and multiply it by 2 degrees, every 40 miles, which is the 40-mile separation of the window, there's a spacecraft. There's talk about moving it to 1-degree spacing. And that's going to be really difficult now because there's at least 250,000 pieces of space debris all floating through that layer of the atmosphere. And it's all at 17,500 miles an hour. That never changes. They all rotate and they all fly through the system at 17,500 miles an hour. Theoretically, a grain of sand at that speed, at that elevation, could go through a steel girder. So all these satellites have to be moved out of the way of all this space debris. So we're in this constant chess game of moving all these communication satellites around. These spacecrafts have everything from your television networks, again, banking information. All your internet banking would be down if they lost a satellite. I mean, they pay billions and billions of dollars rent a year to rent channels on that satellite to, you know, keep programming on and financial information on and credit card information on. So we're talking like anything else. It's all big business. It's all big bucks, Ken.
So what you're describing, and if I'm wrong, tell me, but I always see these satellites launched and I think, usually if you see, okay, if it's a NASA scientific satellite, they'll show the JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory Mission Control, and they're there and they're going to watch this satellite and monitor it. I never thought that you have companies like CBS and NBC
Absolutely.
who also have to watch their satellites. So is that kind of what you're doing? It's almost the mission control for CBS's satellite. Rusty Fender now works as an aerospace systems engineer for NASA Goddard, and we'll talk all about that after this break. Welcome back to the show. Rusty Fender used to spend some of his time doing traffic reports on the radio. Now he works for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation and NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, helping smooth out transportation here on Earth and beyond. As you came in too, I said, hey, where'd you come from today? You said, I'm working with PennDOT. You know, I was out in Philadelphia, and on the weekends you're down in Maryland with NASA Goddard.
Correct.
What are you doing now with NASA?
My area is the 2050 Manned Mars Landing Project, and the one I probably still will be here for is in 2029. That's coming right up. It's Da Vinci, after Leonardo da Vinci. So the Da Vinci project is to send 2 probes as part of one spacecraft. It is to send an orbital probe and a descent probe to the surface of Venus. Never before been done. The Soviets did it on June 7th, 1985. So that 50-year mark has 85. So that mark has gone. That was 40 years ago. They managed to get back a couple of really good black and white television signals, photos, before it burned up. Because the ambient temperature on Venus from shade to sunlight is 900 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's going to take 2 years to get there. So they're going to launch it in June of 29. It's going to get there in June of 2031. I think I'll still be working in 31. It's going to take 6 months of rotations to do an orbital pass around Venus. It's going to be 3 times a day. Then they're going to send a descent probe down through the atmosphere, which is what they call a heavy atmosphere. Venus is a very, very harsh, unforgiving planet. It is 96% carbon dioxide, 3% nitrogen, and the other 1% is a combination of all your toxic gases like sodium hydroxide, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen sulfide, rotten egg gas. When it rains, when it precipitates on Venus, it precipitates sulfuric acid. That's how harsh the planet is. And the planet is dense because it's a cloud layer. They've never been able to really get a good look until recently at what's on Venus because of the cloud layer. It's always a cloud layer. Another great point of trivia. We know that Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. Yet, Venus is the hottest planet in the solar system. Why? Because Mercury has no atmosphere. So all the heat radiates off the planet. It never clears the cloud cover on Venus, which traps all that heat. It's like a globe that keeps the warming in all the time. Never dissipates. So they're going to try and get this descent probe from the main probe down onto the surface of Venus. They figure they have 17 or 18 minutes of battery time before something goes wrong or it burns up or runs out of battery time. The only problem is with the atmosphere, they tried to slow it down as much as possible, but still, even with trying to slow it down with just using the atmosphere, having no brakes, more or less, no descent thrusters to slow it down, it's going to hit the surface, they figure, at 25 miles per hour. And that might have an impact on being able to transmit at that point. That's pretty fast. You think of an allo accident at 25 miles an hour, you can get seriously banged up at 25 miles an hour. So you have a spacecraft coming down which probably weighs about maybe 300 pounds hitting that atmosphere, which I'm not quite sure what it is, what that surface is. So that's going to be like the single point failure, as they say in the aerospace engineering business, the single point failure of whether that space probe works or not. But it's very, very exciting. And, being that it's one of the few times we're exploring, planets close to the sun, because we're always going the other way.
What you're working on with Mars, is that kind of a hypothetical, what are we looking at, this is what could work or could not work, or is it now taking a look and saying, no, we're going to use the Artemis program and this is how we're going to get there?
Mars has been going on now for about 10 years. So we've come a long way, more or less, in weeding out what they're not going to do and what won't work. You know what I mean?
So you and your group are looking at everything, the whole project, and saying, okay, this is the technical aspect, this is how we have to deal with human beings and psychology, and this is what it's going to take to get us to Mars.
I'm looking at telemetry.
Telemetry, okay.
Right. So that's my department is the telemetry. For me flying spacecrafts, that's why they called me. I didn't call them, they called me. And they wanted people who had a lot of communication satellite experience. A lot of people like myself who would monitor transmissions from HBO and Nickelodeon and Showtime and the movie channel, and do quality control and see how long a spacecraft would last. And when you get 10 years into it and you're running out of fuel, you have to start shutting down some of your systems to make that last. So on a spacecraft where you probably had, in the digital age, probably 500 transponders, and a transponder is a channel. So you had 500 channels, 500 transponders. Near the end of its life, you're probably using 50. Because you're saving energy to make that satellite as long-lasting as you possibly can at that point to get as much as as much as you can out of that spacecraft.
You also were very involved. Glynn S. Lunney,
yes.
who key figure in NASA history. I mean, huge figure
Absolutely.
in NASA history, working with Mercury, Gemini, Apollo. Was huge in the Apollo
Absolutely.
13 mission. I saw he got the Presidential Medal of Freedom for working there. You made sure, which I didn't know this. I might have known it and forgot it. Maybe I'm just using that as an excuse now, that he was from Old Forge, Pennsylvania.
My neighbor.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Tell me how that all came about. And you made sure he was honored there, and
yes,
now he is honored.
It took 54 years to get, and if I wasn't working for PennDOT and wasn't working for NASA, because we needed NASA to authorize the use of the logo, and then we needed PennDOT because you cannot name a PennDOT road after someone. You cannot change South Main Street in the borough of Old Forge to Glynn Lunney Way. You can use it as an addendum to it and call it Glynn Lunney Way, but it has to be, South Main Street, a state road, and that's a state road through the main town. If you're in any town in America and you wanted to name a side street Bugs Bunny Lane, go for it. You go before your local council, they'll say, yeah, I see no problem with that. It's Bugs Bunny Lane. But to name a PennDOT highway or a state route, you cannot do that. So it took 54 years, about 10 different mayors, 8 changes of council to finally get that done. So Glynn S. Lunney was a neighbor of mine. And after he was a 55-year flight director for NASA, and he moved to Houston. He was from Old Forge, and just passed on several years ago. And he was very instrumental. He was on duty not only for the Apollo 11 mission, Man on the Moon, but they also mentioned Glynn a couple of times in the Apollo 13 movie with Ron Howard. They say, Glynn, we have a problem here with the telemetry. So the Glynn they refer to in the Ron Howard blockbuster movie Apollo 13, he was on the night that Apollo 13 malfunctioned. He was home, but they called him in. That was the ill-fated mission. So Glynn, I thought that would be a nice way, and the portion of South Main and Old Forge is a very long street, runs from Taylor to Pittston to Duryea. So I thought it'd be nice where Glynn's family home was to rename it, and we finally got it done, thanks to Old Forge Borough Council and the mayor at the time, Bob Legg. People, people forget. I mean, look at it, 1969. I mean, it's 56 years ago. 90% of the population wasn't alive 56 years ago. So you forget, when Glynn came back a couple weeks after they put Man on the Moon, he came back and they had a parade and a dinner at the church, and they had speakers from all over the state came in to speak at this incredible deal. And then, it gets diluted as long as it goes on because people forget.
Coming up next, Rusty Fender chats about the International Space Station, what music he would take with him to Mars, and what he used to chat about with local space hero and NASA flight director Glynn S. Lunney. It's almost time for re-entry, but before we land this starship, let's toss some random questions at local aerospace engineer and radio personality, Rusty Fender. I think it's interesting with the International Space Station because you mentioned it and how much we've learned from that to take us to the next step, because a lot of people think, hey, since the space shuttle we haven't been doing anything. There have been people in space for what, the past 25 years from when that thing started in the year 2000. It's given us so much knowledge, and also it's brought in a lot of nations together. You've had us working with Russia for the past X amount of years. No matter what was kind of going on, we were going to space with them and finding ways to at least make that work, and other nations that have been up there as well. So it does bring together, and I was going to ask you before, when you talk about going to Venus and that, people always ask why. Why do we go to Mars? Why do we go to Venus? Now, if you look at a lot of the scientific reasoning, I heard a lot of proponents for Venus saying, hey, that's a runaway greenhouse effect you have going on Venus. We could learn a lot about the Earth and what we're doing here by studying Venus. You could go into it that way, but from what you're saying too, is it brings a lot of people together.
It does, and I think that's the main point that gets overlooked, is that for that brief moment in time, we're all kind of one. And again, we'll go back to fighting and blowing up daycares and banks and bridges the next day. But for that one moment, that we're all unified in like a common cause to do something that has never before been done. That's very true about the greenhouse. And I also believe that, and this is kind of far-fetched. You won't even be alive for this, but I do believe that it's going to be a populous setting probably 200 years from now. If people still exist 200 years from now, I'm not quite sure they will, but it's out of my realm, it's above my pay grade. But if they do, I think that these planets being close enough, I think the technology, like I said before, from 1900 to 1970 we did nothing. And then from 1970, 1969 we put a man on the moon, internet. It's just amazing what we've done in like just a few years, a fraction of that, because the technology keeps on snowballing. It gets better, it gets faster, it gets cheaper. So, I think that being a populous area, do you think that people could actually inhabit Mars? Not for a very, very long time, but as a scientist and engineer myself, I believe that anything's possible. That's how you can tell a true technical person. You can't say, "Wow, you're a moron." That No, I'll listen to what you're saying. I don't think it's going to happen soon. As far as Venus, I'm not quite too sure about Venus. That's just it's a toxic poison atmosphere. Mars, possibly. The moon, definitely.
I have a few miscellaneous questions because
Sure.
I've kept you here for a while, but I had stuff that's just sitting in my mind that I did want to ask you, because I do know even now the astronauts get to pick what they want, what music they want to wake up to during the day. I know the NASA astronauts back in the Apollo program had certain music that was playing. Even in the Apollo 13
That's
movie, you heard it. A lot of country music back then. I saw there's a famous documentary. I forget what it was, but the composer did. He tied in a lot of country music.
And Spirit in the Sky for Apollo 13, Norman Greenbaum, yeah.
So you're people who know you as Shadoe Steele as well, who does Saturday Night Live at the Oldies. You have vast musical knowledge. What would you bring up there with you?
Probably nothing.
Nothing?
No, I would like the sounds of silence as well.
That's what you enjoy, the peace and quiet.
I listen to nothing in the car. I don't have the radio
Why
on.
is that? Is that just because you're always...
Probably because I've done it for the last 56 years.
So
It's
you've heard enough.
Yeah, I can't hear some of these songs one more time, to be quite honest with you. But it's like, they will beam things up to wake you up probably from the ground at that point. I don't think I would bring anything with me. I'd certainly bring a lot of TV stuff. I'd bring some movies, or, well, you don't even have to bring anything now. It's all streaming.
Yeah.
They stream the link. Stream a link. Could you imagine on the way to Mars and you're streaming a movie? Yeah. And it's not science fiction. It's science. It's here. So I really don't think that's a good question, but I don't think you really have to bring anything anymore.
They'll send it up there with you.
Yeah. I mean, you're in an internet ready, capable area. It's amazing.
So what movie would you stream first on Mars?
Probably Apollo 13.
Apollo 13?
Yeah.
What was Glynn Lunney like?
I never met him.
Oh, really? No kidding?
I only talked to him on the phone. He was on all things Saturday Night Live.
Was he really?
Yeah, on every 5 years on the anniversary of the moon landing. So I'd have him on as a guest to see what he's doing. Again, his cousin is a mutual friend of mine who's the vice president of technology at WVIA Channel 44. Okay. And Glynn would come on and do like a 15, 20-minute interview on 1969. So he'd be on in 2004, 2009 on the fives every 5th anniversary.
What did you ask him? Do you remember one of the questions you asked him?
About the main question is something I addressed before. It's like, what do you say to people? And this is glad you asked that. I said, what do you say to all these non-believers with the start of all this social media that say, we were never on the moon? Give it up. You got to be kidding. And I still use this at all of my lectures. Glynn Lunney said, here's what I tell people. He said, in 1969, it would have been tougher to fake it than to actually do it. I said, that probably stops them right in their tracks. There's not another question after that. He said to get 70,000 people were involved. Everybody that made the Westinghouse camera that photographed them coming down the ladder, jettisoned out. It was on a tripod. It stabilized on the ground. It was aimed when it stabilized right at the ladder coming down. Everybody who made every light bulb to a jet arc thruster to the camera, 70,000 people. Do you think that 70,000 people could keep that a secret and not tell anybody? You've got to be kidding. As they say, you can only keep a secret if there's 2 people and one of them's dead. Like, you think these people would not tell their wife or their significant other that this is a big joke? Don't tell anybody? It's preposterous to even think that people would believe that this wasn't done. And I'm the first person that looks at something, technical, and I want to analyze this too. You're not going to tell me that this is, I'm going to look at this myself and say, yeah, well, this really could happen. But it's like, people have a lot of time on their hands, and they analyze. I've seen the shows. I've seen the shows where they show the same landscape in a different shots. You're on the moon. How does anybody know what that looks like? Right? There's no light on the moon. The only ambient light is from the sun's refraction. If there's no light on the moon, how do you know what the moon looks like? So that's the greatest answer I think ever. It's tougher to actually pull it off, not to pull it off, than to do it. So it was easier to do it and not have any problems.
As we've learned, Rusty Fender is kind of a Renaissance man with a ton of great stories, and he shares a lot of them on The Sam Lassand Show right here on SSP TV. Sam Lassand helps Rusty Fender celebrate 40 years of his radio show, Saturday Night Live at the Oldies. You can watch that episode of The Sam Lassand Show at ssptv.com. Thank you all for watching. Until next time, take it easy, everyone.